Here's how to make post-apocalyptic bases for miniatures. Bases are oftentimes overlooked when it comes to miniatures. With not too much work, you can have a base that really draws interest to your minis. Things you need: a base and a mini. I prefer to paint the mini and the base separately. Super glue. Cork. You can use cork bark or various thicknesses. This is to give your base some height. I'm not a huge fan of completely flat bases. Grass tufts. I glued these on later after painting, so I picked a color I liked. I use Woodland Scenics at Wasteland Tufts. Scrap to glue onto your base. Scrap can include cardboard. Speaking of glue, if you have any sections sticking out that you want to be firmer, use Mod Podge or PVA glue to harden them. Barrels, tires, and other post-apocalyptic things. I 3D printed mine, but you can buy them from sites like Green Stuff World. Skulls, chains, pretty much anything that looks like junk or metal. Texture paste and crackle paste. It doesn't matter what kind, as we'll be painting it later. A stick to apply the texture paste. Sand. Got a small bag of reptile sand from a pet store, but you can also just go to a beach and scoop up some sand. Bonus points if it has tiny rocks in it. And a glove. First, dry fit your mini and the cork together. Make sure your base has enough space for the feet to have contact points. Then, glue on the cork. Give the glue some time to dry. I like to scrape the dried edges down to make the elevation more gradual. I use a hobby knife. Be careful not to cut yourself. Save the big bits scraped off to use as texture on other bases some other time. Next, play around and dry fit some scrap onto the base. I only do this with any big pieces that might go on, like barrels or tires. Then apply texture paste on base areas that won't have big pieces like barrels. This allows you to get the texture paste in otherwise difficult to reach places before gluing something big on. Glue on your pieces and fill any gaps that were left. I probably didn't need as much empty space here in the previous step, but that's okay. I made sure to have the texture paste look like it's really burying the gas tank. Next, if you want to vary the ground texture even more, add some crackle paste. The goopier the paste, the bigger the cracks are when the paste dries. I added a bit of screen to the top layer, and it doesn't really showcase the bigger cracks, so I made another base to show off how the cracks look when they dry. Now, add more and more scrap until you're satisfied with the look. A lot of things won't require super glue because they'll be held in place by the paste as it dries. Finally, take a pinch of sand and sprinkle it onto areas, which will help create even more textural variety. You can use a finger to press bigger pieces into place. I don't know why I pressed the feet into the base at this point, but you can wait until the base sets a little longer to make sure the mini's feet have a flat footing and look like they are pressing into the sand. Once it's completely dry, base coat it and give it a zenithal highlight. I used an airbrush for this, but you can use a rattle can or brush. Now, on to painting. The most difficult part of this process is just waiting for washes to dry. So it's not a bad idea to batch paint these since you'll be doing a lot of waiting around. Paints I use are sandy colors. You need a light and dark color. It doesn't really matter what colors as long as they're sandy. A brown wash and a red wash. You can use oil washes here. For bigger pieces, I recommend making your own wash to save money. White, some metallic paints, typhus corrosion and Ryza rust, and whatever colors you'll use for the scrap. I used red and white for the specific base. First, base coat the mini with your two sand colors. This can be extremely messy in general. I try to put the lighter color on the topmost parts of the base and the darker on the lower. You can also mix the paints to get a good middle ground. Then, base coat the scrap. I like to do this messily, so no need for amazing coverage. Then, chip the bases with your metallic paints if they're colored. By chip, I mean messily stab at the edges and worn areas. Then take some typhus corrosion and apply it to the areas where you think would be the most worn, such as edges. As always, once that's dry brush or scrape on some Rhiza rust to the dried typhus corrosion. Next, cover the whole base in your brown wash. Let dry completely. Once that's dry brush on some of your original light color. Do this by taking a big soft brush, dipping it into some paint, then, on a paper towel, rub away nearly all of the paint. Then lightly sweep your brush around the base. This catches the raised edges. Since we have so much texture going on in this base, dry brushing works really well. Then, to add additional tone, apply an all-over wash with your reddish wash. Be sure to hit any skulls, otherwise don't cover the scrap. Time to take another break and let all that completely dry. By this time, you should have a painted mini ready to go on. Get the mini off of your temporary base and dry fit it onto the base. This is how we can determine where we should place grass tufts. For example, the space between the raised part and the skull seemed barren, so I added a tuft. I also cut a tuft in half and glued it right next to the skull. Then, dry brush again with a mix of your lightest sand color mixed with white. Also, add a drop of wash to the new grass tufts you added to create depth. Now you can glue your mini onto its base. It's a good idea to pin your minis when dealing with cork. I sorta suck at this, but I drill into the mini's foot and superglue a section of paperclip into the hole. Careful when drilling into resin prints, you don't want the foot to break off. I dip the paperclip first into white paint and make a little mark to tell me where to drill into the base. I have my drill size wrong, so this is sort of a struggle, but you get the idea. Then paint the rim of the base black, and it's ready for action. I also like to go one step further and add pigment powder. I don't really know how to set pigment powder in place very well, but what I do is take a very thin layer of matte varnish and apply it to the foot and a little onto the base. Then I take a dry brush dedicated to pigment powders and put some on the mini, wiping away excess and trying to get it into realistic areas. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips for making pigment powder set. I'd really appreciate it. That's all there is to it. I think this is a relatively simple and fun method to make bases that are sure to impress and upgrade your minis. If you found this helpful, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Alright, bye-bye.